Welcome to the show, everyone. Dana.
Surprise, we're laughing again.
Surprise! We're starting one of the episodes with laughing. Dana and I are often trying to figure out what is speaking to our hearts today. It's like a water rod. I feel like, oh, my heart feels good with that one, Dana. I want to talk about that one, Dana.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What's our topic for today, Dana? It's a doozy.
So, we're going to talk about, well, first of all, and again, air quotes, functional labels. We hate those labels, but too functional to get a diagnosis, right? Which is really kind of saying that you mask really well, or you don't meet all of the DSM criteria for this thing. I hear from a lot of people that say, I did a ton of research. These are all the things that are true about me. And then they go to talk to a professional and this just makes me crazy. They get things like, oh, you can't be autistic. You make too much eye contact. Or you seem too functional, or you clothe yourself every morning. And so, of course, you're not. I mean, in a way, they're commenting about the level of functionality, but it's also not a static thing. It's fluid. Within each person, it's fluid between people. And just because you're coping or not letting the outside world see things, it doesn't mean they don't exist. There's so many memes out there, like just show someone flat on the floor, like ironed out. And it's like, this is me at the end of the day after peopling the whole day. And then, I don't move for 12 hours. To me, that's not functional. I mean, just because you're functional out there. One of the things that I do too, when I do assess folks, I assess adults, a lot of women don't get diagnosed because they're so good at masking. When I give these measures to these folks, I do prime them. I give them instructions and say, answer these questions as honestly about your inner world as you can. And don't be worried about what I'm going to think or what someone who sees the results is going to think. And it changes everything, right? So I'll have someone take a measure they've taken before, and they'll say, I remembered the instructions. When I took it the first time, did I want to admit that I'd rather stay home than go out with friends? Oh no, I picked the socially acceptable answer, but you told me do what's really in my heart. And I would rather stay home by myself than go out with friends. Because there's so much about like the pathology and the stigma around if you're not, quote, normal, it's okay to feel better in a quiet place than out in the open at a party with a bunch of friends, because it's your neurology, right? We have to get the fact that autism is even in the DSM. I'm starting to really get angry about it. Is diabetes in the DSM? No. You know what I mean? It's a neurological, is seizure disorder in the DSM? No, because it's a neurological condition. It's an issue, right? So to say someone doesn't meet these criteria that are pathologizing, and I dissected all those in my book. I'm in the process of doing videos for TikTok, reframing all those, and realizing when people respond to that, they're like, thank you. So when someone says, the one I did yesterday was abnormal social approach, I'm doing air quotes, and I'm like, oh, I want to die when I read some of those criteria, right? So if you are functional and that you have learned to, not interrupt people, or when you come into a room, people are talking, don't just jump in right away, even though you want to with every fiber of your being because you're autistic or neurodivergent, and you learn not to, doesn't mean those things aren't still going on inside of you, right? So this outward behavior that's measurable by the other person, or these criteria that were devised by the other, necessarily has nothing to do with what the inner experience is. And that's what you and I are interested in. We're interested in what's going on in this lived experience, right? Because that's what's really important. That's if we're sitting across from this person, I don't care what their mother thinks. What are they going through, right? So am I too functional, right? I do have a private practice. I do have a full-time job. Does it mean that I'm not autistic? Absolutely not. It means that I've figured out lots of stuff in my life to cope and get through that. Doesn't mean I'm not. It would be just the same as if someone has diabetes and they're insulin dependent, let's say. They're never going to be able to not be insulin dependent. It's always going to be there. So it'd be ridiculous to say, oh, you look really good today. You know, you're dressed nice, your hair is combed, you took a shower, you're at work. You don't need insulin anymore, do you? I mean, that sounds ridiculous when we say it that way. And that's really the analogy when you say you're too functional. Now, another thought that I had recently, I'm sure it's not just my thought alone, is it's autism spectrum. I always just say autism spectrum. I drop the D. I don't say the disorder part. Mm-hmm. But in the DSM, autism spectrum disorder, I mean, the DSM is disorders.
Yeah.
Can you be autistic and not be disordered, right? Have you learned to cope in such a way that you manage symptoms and issues and things like we talked about last time? I'm managing sensory input. If I know I'm going to be somewhere, I'm going to get a lot of sensory input, plan a day to recover, something that a neurotypical wouldn't have to do. It doesn't mean I'm not neurodivergent. That doesn't go away, just like need for insulin doesn't go away. So maybe I'm autistic, but I don't have ASD. I don't know. Is the disordered version of it something different? I mean, our field doesn't see them as separate, right? But maybe we should. So if someone's coming in and hasn't had a chance to work on learning their body cues, pay attention to that, hasn't figured out a way to structure their life to do better and feel better, maybe it is a disorder at that point. You work with them and the goal is to get them to just autism spectrum. I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of just thinking off the top of my head. Why is it that when someone is doing well, despite what they have to deal with, all of a sudden they're too functional? It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think the assumptions that are made about what functioning is also like a problem. So we've spoken about this in previous episodes, but you know, when we only use verbal language as a signal of intelligence, let's just say, now we have like, I mean, how many adults do I support who are incredibly insightful, verbal adults who cannot leave their homes?
Yeah. Or can communicate really, really well, but beautifully not speaking. They're doing it on a keyboard or in other ways.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yep. Exactly. But you know, it's like those are the clients that tend to be denied SSI or denied services because they can speak. And it's like, wait a minute, right? Or the idea of, you know, when we've not really talked about twice exceptional individuals, you know, where, you know, we've got quite a bit of discrepancy in one person's profile, in their own profile, but their lowest, air quotes, score is average, right? Yeah. Then, you know, the people are like, oh, but, you know, your lowest score is average, so you're fine. And it's like, no. This discrepancy that exists is where the suffering lies, you know? So I've really, we've been really as a field, well, there are some people in our field that are really trying to move away from that high functioning, low functioning language or that high functioning, low functioning label, right? Versus
and that isn't in the DSM anymore. It's it's how much
levels.
Support you need,
right? And I like that move. I will say I do like that move, which is how much support do I need? Yeah. It is moving in the right. I think that is moving in the right direction because, you know, my highly articulate, bright, autistic adult that I support that can't leave their homes. That person needs a lot of support.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And so, you know, a lot of times we miss like what we would call adaptive skills. You know, the adaptive skills are not there. The intellectual skills are there.
Yeah.
But the adaptive skills, right?
And maybe they can't be. Maybe they can't, because of their neurology, they can't do those things.
Yeah. It's not purposeful.
Right. And maybe, you know, I think about something like in the DSM, for folks that don't know, there's various depressive diagnoses, right?
Yeah.
Major depression, something called dysthymia,
Dysthymia.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And the analogy would be like if you have a day where you're depressed, or maybe even a couple days where you're depressed, and something depressed you. There's a reason you're depressed. Your best friend moved away or something like that. The DSM minimum with some of those diagnoses is you have to have those symptoms for most of the day, every day, like 2 weeks in a row. And so that sort of makes sense. It's starting to build to where it's more days than not.
Yep.
You're in that place. Makes sense that that's like diagnosable depression, according to the DSM. Does it mean everybody else doesn't get depressed from time to time? Of course not. We all have days like that. So that's sort of what I'm positing around what
Mhm.
is within the realm of this normal human experience for someone who's neurodivergent, given how their brain is wired. And why do we continually say, I want you to be neurotypical, so do all these things. And if you can't, I'm going to give you this pathological label. But if you're not pathological enough, I'm not going to support you. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, right? So you have someone who can't leave the house. We should be talking about what can we do to support that person not leaving the house. Grocery delivery, getting them a job where they don't have to leave the house. But the mindset
Yep.
really is no, we need to figure out a way to make them leave the house. They need to go to the store, they need to get the job outside the house. That's that, majority mentality. Because we have to get them cured or we have to get them over that. Why? If there are
Yeah.
adaptations that we can put in place to do it another way, why don't we do those things?
Yeah.
The schema is so based in it's so marginalizing and it's so ableistic, every piece of it, that I'll even get caught up in it at times. It's like, oh damn it, there I am being ableist again, right? Versus meeting that person where they're at.
I mean,
Right?
that's the idea of implicit bias. And maybe that's another episode for us.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, what is implicit bias? Does
Hmm.
implicit bias exist? By the way, the short answer of that, or the punchline, is yes, it does.
Yes.
As psychologists, we're really asked to analyze our own biases.
Yeah.
As we enter therapy. I mean, I've got some base assumptions I have that I share with every new client before
Hmm.
before we start.
Hmm.
I'm like, these are my base assumptions about people and about
Yeah.
the work. And I think that's really helpful. But, especially as I'm supporting clients in transition. So like, how do we think about launching this person into their adulthood and what they believe their
Hmm.
adulthood is? If I don't capture the cultural values of a
Yeah.
family,
Yeah.
not everyone is going to move away from their family home.
Yeah.
And so, so anyway, so I'm off topic with the bias. I mean, with these biases, but
No, I think it is on topic because you're talking about who's defining the functional enough,
yeah,
right? And so if the expectation is more about that implicit, oh, well, that's what humans are supposed to do. Wait a minute, are they? I mean, there's plenty of other cultures that move around people's abilities where they are. And if that person says, I want to get better at that, great. I'll support you to be able to leave the house if that's a goal you have and something you really want to do. But if someone says, I can do my job and do these other things and I'm happy as a clam, who are we to say they're not, right? By the same token, someone who is able to leave the house or go to their job and those kinds of things, and we say, you're not impaired enough to get the
yeah,
diagnosis. And I think that that's something that I think it has been important about, well, there's several facets to the self-diagnosis piece. If you're not having to get an accommodation, in which case you need like one of us professionals to tell you yes. And I'm being sarcastic here for people that can't see my face.
or read sarcasm.
Yeah, read sarcasm. I do this like Harry Carey head bobbing thing when I'm being silly. Um, if if that's the case, um, you are in a little bit of a bind because if you get an assessor who can't see what's really going on the inside, they may not give you the label. They may say it was too functional. And it's another thing, the single biggest piece of advice I give to people that are in those scenarios is don't mask. Let them see it
Yep.
all.
I say
Like,
the
let them
same
see
thing.
you, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Or like do what I do, I do a lot of self-report measures and I have adults so they can say, this is what's going on in my inner world, right?
Yep.
And to me, it's why it's so much more valid. I love this thing. I follow this person on Instagram, and it's chronic illness humor because I have some chronic illnesses too, and it's fun to laugh at those things. But they'll every once in a while, it's that flavor of that meme, which will be like the doctor saying, "Well, don't mistake, my 5 years of medical school with your Wikipedia search." And then, but the person says back, well, don't discount your 1 hour lecture you had in medical school with my 20 years of living with this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it. It sort of is like, I love that idea of flipping the narrative, right? To say, yes, you're the doctor, you've learned about the science, but I've lived with this for 20 years and I have researched its guts out and I know every little thing about it. We're starting to get clinicians now that will say, oh, yes, tell me what you know. And I'll do that with people I'm assessing. Before I give any measures, I say, tell me what research you've done. What do you know?
Yep.
Tell me what you resonate with. And then I know clinicians that'll be like, oh no, well, they're diagnosis seeking. And I'm like, well, no, they've just done a ton of research because they want to know what the hell's going on with them. And then you can confirm that. Most of the people that I assess, I'm not even like truly assessing, I'm confirming because they've done so much research, right?
Yep.
With the population that I work with. So never would I say, if they're meeting all that, say, but you have a job, you're too functional, you shouldn't have that label. But as it's written in the DSM, it seems like you couldn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it even comes down, I mean, you bring up a really good point here, which is our tools of assessment are also
Mm-hmm.
biased.
Right.
So if I think about like the SSI, so many of my clients receive SSI, and every year you need to qualify again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there is an interview.
Oh,
Okay. And you go into this interview. And, for my clients that are non-speakers, this is really easy actually, because, if you
God.
don't speak, well, perfect. That's great. You're not functioning. Okay. So
Oh my
great. Like
God.
that's a plus in that direction. However, my highly verbal client that
Oh
does
yeah.
speak and is pulling it all together to make it to his 10-minute interview for SSI,
Mm-hmm.
they ask questions like this. Could you work?
Oh God.
Do you want, can you take care of yourself? Yes, yes, yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And now we've, have a denial, right? And this is a clerical person. This isn't a,
And you look at the goal
so
there. So in the United States with Social Security,
yes,
the goal is to not give it out. I mean, those people are trained
correct.
to, right? Whereas other countries
Yes.
don't do it that way. They see it as, where can we meet you to make you happy? And in whatever way possible, have you be able to give to society in whatever way you want to, and you have the
Yeah.
capabilities for. It isn't this, oh, I'm going to make sure I trip you up so we don't have to pay you. We don't have to give you
Well, we
support.
did find out that these people are incentivized actually
Oh,
to
God.
not.
Yeah. See, that's just
So
a system that's
there's,
broken. Yeah.
yeah. And, I understand it. I mean, I think there are probably people out there that are like, because now we're hitting into other political issues of
Mhm.
welfare and socialization and socialized kinds of support. And, what's interesting is that I think if my clients, I know this, when they are met where they
Mhm.
are, they become very productive.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the opposite. When they're
Yeah.
met where they are, they just are incentivized to do nothing.
Yeah.
Actually, and that's a base assumption I have, right? Which is people are doing the best they can.
Yeah.
And that sometimes what happens or what also exists is people are doing the best they can and
Yeah.
they're making mistakes and they're struggling. And
Yeah.
like
Yes.
those
Right.
dialecticals exist. And
Yeah.
but I've never had it where someone is supported and empowered and then they're like, I'm incentivized to do nothing.
Yeah.
That
Right.
actually is not the case. I've
Right.
not seen that at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's a misconception for people that might not do this work or
Yeah.
know someone
Well, yeah,
that struggles.
absolutely, and that's what I mean by the system's broken. The system
Yeah.
is to try to, only catch the ones that are trying to scam the system, which are such a tiny little minority.
Yes.
That then they screw everybody else over. It's sort of like the chronic pain world, people that were taking medication, it was working. And then, yes, the whole opioid crisis, and it's a tragedy and everything else. But now there's all these barriers. I work a lot with chronic pain folks too. There's all these barriers to getting medication. Ritalin is a good example. People that are ADHD, you're meant to, the way it's set up, you feel like you're a drug-seeking criminal. You have to get a paper prescription every time, and you have to wait for it. You have to show up, and your insurance won't pay for it even a day early. And it's a horrible experience for those people. So they're continually feeling just marginalized every month when they go, right? And not surprisingly, then they forget to get it filled, and then they have all these days where they haven't taken medication and they're not functioning well. And it's just, I think so. Talking about you're too functional for the diagnosis, there's so many of these societal ableistic environment that we're living and working in. That is the problem. The problem isn't you. The problem is the systems you have to navigate and move through. That's what really the problem is.
Yeah. Well, and that's the piece, that's the downside of advocacy, is that the burden does fall on the person who's advocating.
Right.
And that's the system, that our system is really, really favors people who advocate. If you don't advocate, you definitely won't get it. And so that automatically, I think there's a systemic bias there, because there's lots of reasons why people don't advocate. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they don't know how, they don't know the system, they don't have the resources, they can't take time off of work. I mean, and
it's exhausting.
This is a bigger issue, but again, it's like my clients get really tired is what happens. We've got autistic burnout by this time. And they're really, really angry at the world and this and the system that they're in. So, how do we support people? And I think this is where I see my role as a psychologist, which is, how do I create that space where there's attunement and an ease of being understood for a moment? I think that can be really powerful.
I think that's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is getting knowledge out there to as many people as we can who might be able to find it, who couldn't get that knowledge otherwise.
Yeah.
That's how you can sort of afford some change and start to change some minds. Yeah. I'm somewhat, not so much changing the system, but I see as I age, my students get younger. They're the same age as I'm getting older. And so the gap.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
They're coming in with this language already, which is awesome, right? Yeah. They're growing up in a different world, which I'm like, oh, thank God. And that could be seen as, from other people, like, oh, they're, blah, blah, blah. And they're entitled and they think they should have this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, yeah, but why shouldn't they have that? It's so great that they're learning how to advocate, that it's just part of their lingo now. I see that as incredibly wonderful. We just need to get them to really grow up and start changing laws and procedures and things like that. But they don't take no for an answer when they know what's really going on. But like you said, that burnout, it's exhausting. I've been in places and periods of my life where I'm just like, I just can't.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. It's not worth the energy. It's not worth the headache. It's not worth the conflict. It's not worth the tension. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And, maybe, in another episode, Dana, the idea of self-disclosure to advocate is a big topic, is it worth it to self-disclose in an academic setting, in a work setting, in a social setting? How does that even work? That's big too, and heaven forbid, and you have any social anxiety whatsoever, it's paralyzing. That's then paralyzing, actually. Yeah. So,
good topic. We'll do that one in the future.
Let's do that one. Yeah. You guys, you Marvels out there, if there's a topic you want Dana and I to talk about, please put it in the comments. Feel free to reach out to us. Dana and I love interacting with you. We have had some really lovely interactions that really, really do keep us going. And, if you like what you're hearing, the best way to support Dana and I really is to like this video or to or make a review on the podcast that you're listening on. It is really the absolute best way to support Dana and I and to continue, just let us know to continue doing this.
Yeah, and ask, even if it's to drill into a topic we've already covered, but you have a
Yeah.
specific depth you want us to go into, go for it. Let us know. We'd love to do that.